Alrighty. So today, instead of talking about a specific episode, I'm going to go over an idea that is something that is fundamental to the setting of Star Trek. One is that Star Trek uses the Planet of Hats idea. It uses it a lot with extreme gusto and reckless abandon. What it does not do is white hats and black hats. So, white hats and black hats is this thing that you'll hear from mostly spaghetti westerns was the origin of it, but it gets passed around in a variety of other kinds of fiction. That idea being that you have the good guys and the bad guys, and the bad guys wear black hats, the good guys wear white hats, and at the end of the movie, the black hats are almost guaranteed to be completely wiped out. Almost. And, everyone is either a good guy or a bad guy with no real nuance or variation. Eh, I mean, it kind of works as a concept, but there's some very significant limitations, and that is that the white hat, black hat thing is on the individual level. It's not on the level of a civilization or even a town. It's individuals. Now, you can make the correlation of having organizations wear a white hat or a black hat, but that's because of the fact that the various members of the organization all, willingly participate in what that organization does. Therefore, the organization defines the character of the individuals that are in it, which, of course, by extension means that if the organization is a black hat organization, then all of the members are there because they want to do black hat things. Which means that they would be black hats whether they were members of the organization or not. And thus, being a member of the organization simply makes it easy to describe them from a storytelling perspective. Now, there is, of course, the exception to this, but that's not really what I'm going into here. See, what I'm looking at here is what are the methods used for characterizing civilizations in Star Trek. And that's a different concept of trope, or I guess you could say a different alignment or something. Anyway, so good and evil, while they are very relevant, it doesn't start with saying evil race or good race. It starts with saying race that lives in this location and does this thing. It's not as simple as just being good and evil, because of the fact that a lot of the time they go with race designs that aren't unambiguously either. And that's where things get interesting. And also, it really makes moral decisions a lot more nuanced and interesting when it's not a transparently obvious case of white hats and black hats. I mean, if you're in a situation with some guys who are obviously black hats, I mean, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that you're just going to shoot them and then move on. There's no real reason to even consider doing otherwise, which from a storytelling perspective has its place, because you don't want to give players reason to scrutinize the motives of literally every single person they run into. That gets really, really old because it bogs down the story and blah 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 blah. You want to give players a quick and easy way to come to grips with the motives and goals of the NPCs that they meet in the story. So, these guys are pirates. Very simple way of describing a group, but it's also a way that gives players um, a hook to understand how to deal with them. So let's look at a few specific examples and quickly go over these. Ornarans and Brekkians. As I mentioned before, neither of these actually gets the white hat or black hat treatment. Because in the case of the Brekkians, while the actions of the Brekkian government are unambiguously evil, that's the government. The actual Brekkian populace isn't really complicit in that. That's actually just like the higher ups in the Brekkian government that are responsible for that, and the um, regular people don't necessarily even know the truth of why they have that arrangement with the Ornarans. That's actually one of those things that got kind of sort of like left out in the episode, because they didn't. Well, there's actually a major plot point in the episode where the Ornarans do not know what Felicium does. They don't actually understand Felicium, and how that is a possibility, well, it seems likely to me anyways. I'm not sure this is actually canonically definitive, but that the Brekkian government made sure that the majority of Brekkians don't know either. I mean, it's a simple idea. If you don't know something, then you can't tell someone. Which, okay, while that is an odd way of looking at it, it means that your average Brekkian isn't actually guilty of anything like that. And that means that the Brekkians as a civilization are in a weird place where, while the government you have reason to not trust and so on and so forth, the actual people are not. And that's a rather strange dichotomy to put into a TTRPG, but a very real one. Because, oh, also in a later episode, they have it as the Brekkians getting attacked by the Breen, and for some reason the Breen decided to murder them all. Not sure why, but hey, that's actually one of those things where it's kind of like a sympathetic moment. It's like, oh, wait, do we want to help the Breen or do we want to help the Brekkians? And then you realize that, oh, wait, actually helping the Brekkians is probably the right call. Not very many people like the Breen. Okay, so also the Ornarans. The Ornarans are also not unambiguously good. While they're unambiguously victims in the original story, they're not just victims of the Brekkians, they're victims of their own complacence. They didn't try all that hard to actually figure out what the heck was going on with the plague that had nearly wiped out their people, and just gave up and accepted that the Brekkian solution to the problem was best, and they decided to just simply play along with it indefinitely, which over time became worse and worse and worse, to the point where the Ornarans had lost the ability to maintain their own freighter fleet, which caused the status quo to break down and required intervention from the USS Enterprise to uh, resolve matters. Which, of course, Picard does in a famous moment where he's like, you know what? Actually, I'm going to let you all stew in your own juices, and I'm going to leave now. Bye. Which forced the Brekkians and the Ornarans to come to a completely uh, redefined arrangement when, after a week or two, the Ornarans got over the Felicium poisoning and well, this particular person says something or other about how uh, a lot of them now have voices in their heads, which sounds rather strange. Yeah, I don't understand that one fully. That's something you could have fun exploring if you did a TTRPG campaign involving Ornarans, but hey. So let's go to another example. Orions. This is one of the longest running sort of bad guy races in Star Trek, because some of them are pirates, some of them are Starfleet officers, and there's a wide variety of things in between, and it's something that, depending on the specific episode, they might get used in a different way, and that gets very, very strange. But that's because of the fact that the Orions are a race that has been a spacefaring civilization for centuries. They have expanded to a rather large chunk of the Alpha Quadrant and Beta Quadrant, and live in places that are, in many cases unconnected from what passes for an Orion government. Also, the Orion government is more of a loose coalition and not a particularly ironclad government. So, various sub governments exist as a result of that, and those organizations have very disparate goals and agendas. Some of them are straight up pirates, some of them aren't, and that's because of the fact that the Orions are not a monoculture. Which is one of those things that Star Trek does way too often, is the alien monocultures thing. Like I went over with the Ornarans and the Brekkians. Like, both of them are functionally monocultures, although in the case of the Brekkians, there's the twist that only a small number of social elites actually know what Felicium does. Most of them just don't know. The majority of the Brekkians aren't even associated with Felicium production. That's the planet's biggest export, but it's not actually something that the majority of the population is involved with. At least not directly. Indirectly, yeah, that's a bit of a domino effect. But anyways, moving on. So for the Orions, because of the fact that they're functionally not a monoculture and thus get used in such a wide variety of ways, you end up with each individual having individual motives and goals and so on and so forth. I mean, you have such people as Devna, who, well, she's actually just a colony administrator type person. She's actually seemingly a very fair and reasonable one. She's an Orion, but that's about the only thing that makes her even somewhat suspicious at all. And, then you have this Xerius guy who, despite being a Romulan, fits into the same group. And it's like, he's just like, yeah, I'm just here to, make things um, move along and so on and so forth. That's another race that, while they were originally used in a very specific way, the Romulans got used in several different ways, even in the original series, to the point where they weren't really being used as a monoculture even in the original series. TNG actually went back to making Romulans more of a monoculture than TOS did, because of the fact that the majority of Romulan plots in TNG were related to Sela trying to undermine the Federation. And, well, when you look at it from the perspective of this stuff is all Sela's fault, suddenly it's like, oh, wait, no, actually the Romulans are kind of getting a bad rap, which makes redefines the how you visualize them, because having highly disparate motives even in the same episode gets very, very interesting. And let's see here. So here do two more quick. Medusans. This is a race that is from a classic TOS episode. And one of the things about Medusans that's interesting is that, due to the bizarre peculiarities of Medusan physiology, since they're an energy-based race, and the energy they're made out of is in some way harmful to humanoids. Attempting to explain how that works has never been done, because sci-fi logic, but in TOS it's actually stated that if a person was to, or a human specifically, was to look at a Medusan directly, it would drive the human insane. No, they don't elaborate on that in enough detail to actually figure out anything, but it is kind of sort of mentioned that not all races are equally affected. Vulcans, with their logically trained minds, assuming this particular Vulcan actually does the proper mental discipline stuff for being a proper logical Vulcan, have a considerable resistance to this. They're not immune to it, though. And people who are blind are just naturally immune, because you have to actually look at the glowing orb with your actual eyeballs. Yeah, anyway, don't ask me. That is as far as that logic goes. The thing is about this, as the Medusans as a civilization, the Medusans are kind of ominous in the fact that, they're scary because of what can happen when people interact with them. But the Medusans as a civilization aren't evil, they're just dangerous in a physical way. And Medusans, well, if a Medusan actually did have ulterior motives and ill intent, would have opportunities to cause some serious problems. They're generally not. And for another interesting one, Aldeans. Aldeans were one of those villain of the week races from TNG, where instead of shooting the villain of the week, the crew of the Enterprise negotiated with them to find out how they could help the villain of the week, and thus resolve the situation amicably. Yeah, as a result of that particular plot contrivance, we find out that the Aldeans were only being villain of the week because of the fact that their civilization is dying. Their planet has been functionally sterilized, and that they're expecting to die out in a matter of 2 or 3 decades if they don't improve matters. And instead of negotiating with the Federation for assistance, the Aldeans decided to kidnap uh, children from the Enterprise as a way of perpetuating their civilization, even if they're not perpetuating their species. Yeah, that's an interesting one. And the exact specifics of Aldean culture are really, really complicated. And I think I actually did 2 different videos talking about Aldeans already. So, I'm not going to go into all the specifics, but the Aldeans are motivated by a point of desperation. And while many of their actions are what you would reasonably consider to be evil, they're doing it because they feel that they have to, rather than because they want to be evil. Which is actually a very reasonable goal for a bad guy. It, it, yes, it's kind of cliched, but it's a cliche because of the fact that it works, not solely because of the fact that it's there. And one last one. Allasomorphs. This is one of those where, like the Medusans, Allasomorphs are scary, genuinely dangerous, and very alien and strange, and ultimately not actually hostile. Eh, and honestly, that's about all there is to say about them. So, like, they're one of those shape-shifting races that are actually quite dangerous as shapeshifters because of the fact that they functionally have superpowers. Thing is, they functionally have superpowers whether they're using their shape-shifting or not. So, And also is that their energy-based nature actually makes them very difficult to injure with most weapons. So, that's another problem when you try to fight them. And that's what makes them scary. Their actual goals and motivations really are very boringly normal. I mean, it's a non-humanoid race that pretends to be humanoids to the extent of acting like humanoids and doing very similar things to humanoids for very similar reasons to what humanoids have for their logic behind doing things. Oh, and it is actually possible for them to become infected with certain diseases. So, um, I guess they're not entirely inorganic. They have some kind of physical substance. Yeah, that doesn't get explained in the episode. Anyway, though, yeah, that's a, a good enough thing, I guess. The whole thing of like alien races, and some of them are far less alien than others. Some of them are easily understood, and like people in real life, aliens often have very selfish motives. But those selfish motives aren't necessarily inherently evil, even if they're telling you to, well, get out of their way. And with that, I will see you guys next time.